The cold wind howled through the barren landscape, whipping up dust and scattering fragments of metal from the wreckage that once was a thriving outpost. Kaido crouched low, his dark eyes narrowing as the sound of heavy boots approaching grew louder. He barely breathed, the tattoo on his forearm pulsating faintly, as though it could sense the impending threat. His hand instinctively brushed the ink design, feeling its intricate pattern beneath his fingers. It was no ordinary tattoo, it was a mark of an ancient power that even he didn't fully understand. The alien mercenaries were coming for him. "Set the perimeter," a harsh voice commanded from a distance. Kaido recognized it instantly, Zarak, the mercenary general, a brutish leader who believed nothing could stand against his mercenary band. He had underestimated Kaido once, but he wouldn't make the same mistake again. The tattoo was a key to unlocking abilities Kaido had only begun to understand. Ancient techniques, born from the old Earth Shinobi clans, hidden within the black ink. To most, it was a relic of the past. To Zarak, it was an insignificant mark. To Kaido, it was his only weapon. Kaido didn't move as the mercenaries closed in, their voices cutting through the air like knives. He could hear them discussing tactics, the heavy rumble of their alien armor brushing against the ground. The noise masked his breathing. Every second counted. The tattoo on his arm seemed to vibrate as if calling to him. He knew it was time. He stood, fluidly rising from his crouch, his body moving like water. His shadow flickered across the debris, blending in with the darkness. He was already on the move before they even noticed him, slipping through the maze of rusted metal and forgotten structures. Kaido was a ghost, unseen, unheard, a mere wisp in the wind. But one of the mercenaries, he'd noticed. The alien was scanning the area, eyes darting back and forth, his instinct sensing something was wrong. "Did you hear that?" the mercenary muttered to his comrade. Kaido's lips twitched into a thin smile, but there was no time for arrogance. He lunged from the shadows, his body a blur of motion, and in one fluid motion, his hand was around the alien's throat. The creature's eyes widened in terror, but it was too late. A sharp crack echoed through the night, and the mercenary slumped, unconscious, to the ground. The remaining aliens reacted with a sudden flare of chaos. Zarak's voice boomed in Kaido's earpiece, his tone seething with rage. "You dare attack us, human? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Kaido didn't respond. Instead, he moved, his body a dance of deadly precision. The tattoo on his arm flared to life, the pattern shifting, glowing faintly as his muscles grew tense with power. He drew a hidden blade, the metal gleaming under the harsh moonlight. Each movement was calculated, methodical, no wasted effort. He was a shinobi. Another alien mercenary rounded the corner, but Kaido was already upon him, the blade flashing in a deadly arc. The alien didn't even have time to raise his weapon. Kaido's strike was so swift that the creature's body crumpled to the ground before it even realized it had been defeated. Behind him, the sounds of more soldiers charging toward him filled the air. Zarak's voice continued to echo, now laced with venom. "He's alone. Surround him. No one escapes us." Kaido's chest tightened. It was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed him. He couldn't afford to engage them all. He had to keep moving. The air felt thick with tension as Kaido ducked into a narrow alley between two collapsed structures, his senses honed to a razor's edge. He could hear their footsteps echoing behind him, growing closer with every passing second. His fingers tightened around his weapon, the tattoo on his arm glowing brighter with each pulse. "Where are you hiding, little human?" Zarak mocked, his voice crackling over the comms. "We've fought entire armies, and we're going to make an example out of you." Kaido's lips curled into a grim smile. They didn't understand. They were underestimating him, just like everyone always did. He was a shinobi, and they were about to learn why that mattered. As the first mercenary rounded the corner, Kaido was already moving. The sound of his footsteps was almost drowned by the cacophony of his enemy's march, but he had learned long ago to rely on silence. The mercenary's face twisted with confusion just before Kaido's blade found its mark, a quick slash to the throat that ended his life without a sound. More voices shouted from the shadows, the mercenaries closing in from all sides. It was no longer a question of winning. It was a question of survival. Kaido's tattoo glowed a fierce blue now, the lines pulsing with energy as the power inside it began to surface. A surge of strength filled his limbs, and in an instant, he was moving faster than the eye could follow. His next moves were almost a blur, a strike here, a quick pivot there. His enemies fell, one by one, their bodies collapsing before they even realized what had happened. Zorak's voice sounded again, this time tinged with disbelief. "How are you doing this? You should be dead by now." Kaido didn't respond. The tattoo had done its work, unlocking techniques passed down through generations of shinobi. The power was his to wield, and he would use it to end this battle on his terms. But as he turned a corner, his heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the shadows, was Zorak himself, his hulking figure framed by the flickering light of a distant fire. "You are impressive, human," Zorak said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But it's time to end this charade." Kaido's eyes narrowed. This was it, the moment that would define everything. His hand twitched toward his tattoo. Zorak's smile was wide and cruel. "You're not the first human to think they could fight me. You're just the latest. And you'll be the last." Kaido's fingers brushed the tattoo once more, and a cold thrill surged through him. The battle was about to take a turn neither of them could predict. The dust stirred in the wind as Kaido crouched behind a jagged stone outcrop, his breath slow and measured. His body ached from the battle, but his mind was sharp, the tattoo on his forearm still glowing faintly. It had granted him power, but it had also awakened a deeper hunger, a drive he had long buried. There was no going back now. He watched Zorak approach, the alien general's hulking figure silhouetted against the dying embers of the rebel outpost. His steps were deliberate, almost leisurely, as if he knew Kaido would be forced into a corner. The arrogance in Zorak's posture was palpable, the mercenary leader had no respect for human abilities. And that would be his undoing. "You're still alive," Zorak's voice boomed, carrying over the wind. "Impressive, for a human. But it won't matter. You're alone. We outnumber you, and your tricks won't save you." Kaido's gaze never wavered from the general. He was studying him, assessing the power in Zorak's movements, the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted the weapon at his side. The alien was confident, yes, but his impatience was evident. "I don't need tricks," Kaido said, his voice low and steady. "I just need my freedom." Zorak laughed, a sound full of menace. "Freedom? You are nothing but a pawn, a relic of a dying world. You fight for nothing." The wind howled again, but the words seemed to settle in the air, heavy with the weight of Zorak's belief. Kaido didn't respond immediately. His focus remained solely on the general's movements, the way his posture betrayed his confidence, how he was too eager to strike. He had underestimated Kaido once, he wouldn't make that mistake again. The tattoo on Kaido's arm pulsed, its pattern shifting beneath his skin like living ink, ancient symbols unfolding with the same precision as his thoughts. The power it granted him wasn't just physical strength, it was a connection to a history he couldn't fully understand. Yet, it was the only thing standing between him and Zorak. Without warning, Kaido launched himself from his hiding spot, his body moving in a blur of speed that left the air itself trembling. Zorak barely had time to react before Kaido was upon him. The general's massive hand swung out, but Kaido was already gone, slipping past him with the ease of a shadow. Kaido's blade sliced through the air, a flash of silver against the darkened sky. It was a clean strike, precise, he had trained for this moment. His heart pounded in his chest, the tattoo on his arm flaring with the energy of 1,000 warriors as it channeled the strength of generations before him. Zorak stumbled back, surprised. The blade had grazed him, just enough to draw blood but not enough to end the fight. His expression shifted from cocky amusement to a flicker of uncertainty. You're faster than I thought," Zorak grunted, wiping blood from his face. His hand clenched around his weapon, a brutal-looking pulse rifle. Kaido didn't waste time with words. He was already moving again, his body a fluid extension of his will. His feet barely touched the ground as he darted toward the mercenary soldiers, who had begun to circle around him. They came at him in waves, firing their weapons and shouting orders in a language Kaido didn't need to understand. His senses were heightened by the tattoo's influence, and he could feel the trajectory of each shot before it was fired. Each movement was a calculated reaction, each step leading him closer to the next enemy. In the space between heartbeats, Kaido's blade danced, cutting through armor and sinew with the kind of skill that only a shinobi could possess. His attacks were fast, decisive, and before the aliens even knew what had hit them, they were on the ground, incapacitated. He moved like a whirlwind, leaving a trail of fallen enemies in his wake. Yet, there was something gnawing at the back of his mind, something unsettling. The tattoo was giving him power, but it was also demanding more from him. He could feel the strain it was placing on his body, the exhaustion that threatened to creep in with each passing moment. It was the price of power, a price he couldn't afford to pay if he was to survive this fight. Serac had recovered, though, and the general was enraged. His eyes burned with fury as he bellowed, "You think you've won? You're nothing but a dying breed of humans clinging to the past. And I'll end you, here and now." With a roar, Serac lifted his pulse rifle, the weapon humming with the power of charged energy. The air crackled, and Kaido knew that this would be no ordinary strike. He couldn't dodge it, he had to think. His mind raced as he scanned the battlefield for anything that could give him an advantage. It came to him in a flash. The ground beneath them was littered with the remnants of the outpost, pieces of broken machinery and scraps of metal. One of the larger pieces, a twisted slab of metal, was just the right size. If he could get to it in time. Kaido darted toward the debris, just as Serac unleashed a blast from his rifle. The energy beam shot past Kaido's shoulder, narrowly missing him as he leaped into the air, his body twisting in mid-motion. He landed hard on the slab of metal, using it as a springboard to launch himself toward Serac. Time seemed to slow as Kaido closed the distance, his blade held high. The tattoo on his arm was burning now, its energy flowing through him with an intensity that made his body tremble. The final strike would end this. Serac's eyes widened in shock as Kaido descended upon him. The alien general raised his rifle, but Kaido was already too close. With one swift, fluid motion, he drove his blade through the general's defenses, striking with the power of his ancestors behind it. Serac staggered back, the pulse rifle slipping from his grasp as he fell to his knees, blood pouring from the wound. His gaze locked with Kaido's, disbelief written on his face. You. Serac sputtered, unable to finish his sentence. His breath grew shallow as his life force ebbed away. Kaido stood over him, the weight of the fight settling on his shoulders. He hadn't won, yet. But he had taken the first step in unraveling the forces that sought to destroy him and the galaxy. The battle was far from over, but for now, Serac would be no more than a fallen relic of a dying empire. The tattoo burned hot against his skin, a reminder that he had only just begun to uncover the truth behind its power. The once thriving rebel outpost now lay in ruins. Smoldering wreckage scattered across the broken landscape, the remnants of a conflict that had left no survivors but Kaido. His breath came in shallow bursts, the weight of the battle pressing down on him as he surveyed the wreckage. His hands still tingled from the energy of the tattoo, the power coursing through his veins like wildfire. Kaido was not unfamiliar with battle, he had fought countless wars in the shadows of history. But the tattoo, that ancient sigil on his arm, had changed everything. It was no longer a simple mark of heritage, it was a catalyst, awakening abilities he had long thought lost to time. The power it gave him was undeniable, but the price was steep. His body ached, each muscle protesting the strain, yet there was no turning back. He had chosen this path. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal and the sharp sting of ozone. His eyes scanned the horizon, waiting for the next wave of mercenaries to appear. Serac had been only a taste of what was to come. The general was dead, but the war was far from over. The mercenary factions, vast and relentless, would send others to finish the job. A crackling sound broke the silence, and Kaido spun, his hand instinctively reaching for his blade. But it was only Lyra, her silhouette emerging from the shadows of the wreckage, her movements cautious but purposeful. "You did it," she said, her voice low but filled with awe as she approached him. "Zarak is dead. You killed him." Kaido nodded, his gaze lingering on the ruins. "It wasn't just him. They'll keep coming, and they'll bring worse next time." Lyra didn't need to ask who they were. The alien mercenaries, a ragtag collection of forces hired by intergalactic warlords, had been ravaging planets for decades. Their strategy was simple: strike, overwhelm, and take whatever they wanted. They had found Earth's remains, a desolate husk, and now, they sought to wipe out the few humans who still clung to survival. "Then we have to keep moving," Lyra said, her tone hardening. "We can't wait for them to regroup. We need to hit them first." Kaido hesitated, his eyes darkening as he met her gaze. "It's not that simple. They're organized. They have resources we don't. We don't even know who's really behind them." "Then let's find out," she pressed, stepping closer. "You've unlocked something with that tattoo. Something that makes you different. We need to use it, now. Before they send an army to wipe us out." Kaido studied her, weighing her words. There was no denying it, the tattoo had granted him strength and speed far beyond normal human capacity. But there were questions he couldn't answer. What was the source of its power? Why had it chosen him? And most importantly, was he losing control of it? "I don't know if I can control it," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "Every time I use it, it feels like I'm losing myself a little more." Lyra's eyes softened, understanding the burden he carried. "We all have our demons, Kaido. But you're the only one who can stop this. You don't have to do it alone. We'll figure this out together." Her words settled over him like a weight, but the cold edge of reality cut through the warmth of her comfort. He couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. "You're right," he said finally, his voice steady once more. "But we move fast. No time to waste." Lyra nodded, her gaze sharp. "Where to?" Kaido took a deep breath, the faint glow of the tattoo on his arm pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "We go to the heart of their operation. We take the fight to them." The journey was grueling. For days, they navigated through treacherous terrain, desolate wastelands, sprawling cities overrun by mercenaries, and the ever-present danger of an ambush. Along the way, Kaido grew more attuned to the strange power within him. The tattoo, once a silent observer, now thrummed with life, guiding his every move, urging him to push beyond his limits. But it came at a cost. As they moved deeper into enemy territory, Kaido began to feel the effects of the tattoo more acutely. His senses heightened, but his emotions dulled. He was no longer as human as he had once been, and it troubled him. Each step he took felt like he was drifting further from the man he had been. Lyra noticed the change. It was subtle at first, the way Kaido's eyes seemed distant, his words fewer and more calculated. But it grew more pronounced with each passing day. She could see the internal battle raging within him, a fight for control that he wasn't ready to face. One evening, as they rested in a hidden alcove, she decided to confront him. "Kaido," she began, her voice soft but firm, "what's happening to you?" He didn't look at her immediately. His gaze was fixed on the distant horizon, where the last rays of the sun were dipping below the edge of the world. Finally, he spoke, his words low and troubled. "The tattoo, it's changing me. The more I use it, the less I feel like myself." Lyra moved closer, her presence a quiet comfort. "I can see it, Kaido. You're becoming something else, something dangerous." His gaze flicked to her, sharp and intense. "I'm not afraid of what I'm becoming. But I fear what it might cost." She didn't reply immediately. There was nothing to say. They both knew the stakes. If the tattoo was his power, it was also his curse. And unless he could learn to control it, there was no telling how far he would fall. They were close now. Ahead lay the stronghold of the mercenaries, a fortress of steel and stone, guarded by an army of soldiers and the promise of destruction. Kaido could feel it, the final confrontation was near. As the sun rose the next morning, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, Kaido stood at the precipice of the mercenary stronghold. His mind raced, the power within him thrumming like a live wire. The time had come to face his enemies, and, perhaps, himself. "Are you ready?" Lyra asked, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Kaido turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I don't have a choice." And with that, they moved forward, into the heart of the enemy's domain. The fortress loomed ahead, a blackened silhouette against the bruised sky, its walls cutting into the horizon like jagged teeth. Kaido's muscles tightened as he surveyed the mercenary stronghold, the hum of the tattoo on his arm growing louder in his ear. It pulsed in time with his heartbeat, urging him forward, promising that the final confrontation was near. His every instinct screamed at him to go in, to strike hard and fast, but something held him back, something deeper than his bloodlust. Lyra stood beside him, her figure a steady presence in the growing dusk. She was still the same woman he had met all those days ago, strong, unwavering, but he could see the same doubt in her eyes that mirrored his own. They both knew what was coming. "We're not going to make it through this without facing the truth," Kaido muttered, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. Lyra glanced at him, her face shadowed but resolute. "We'll make it through together. But you need to keep control. Whatever this thing is, whatever the tattoo is turning you into, it can't consume you. Not now." Kaido nodded, his gaze flickering to the fortress once more. He had been walking this path since the day the mercenaries had first attacked, but now the end was within sight. The tattoo had given him power, but each use of it felt like a gamble, a loss of a piece of himself with every strike, every battle. It wasn't just the power that worried him. It was the price. He flexed his fingers, feeling the subtle burn of the tattoo beneath his skin. The ancient symbols glowed faintly, their energy flaring as he channeled the power. He could feel it coursing through him like wildfire, threatening to consume his mind, to overwhelm his senses. But there was no turning back now. Lyra stepped forward, her voice soft but certain. "We've come too far to turn back. There's no more running, Kaido. This is the fight we've been waiting for." With a final, resolute breath, Kaido drew his blade. The weight of it in his hand felt like the weight of his past, of everything he had lost, and everything he was about to risk. He didn't look at Lyra, but he could feel her eyes on him, a silent anchor in the storm of his thoughts. "We go in now," he said, his voice hard, his resolve unshaken. "We take the heart of their operation, and we end this." The heavy gates of the fortress loomed closer as they neared. Armed guards patrolled the outer perimeter, their eyes scanning the barren landscape for any signs of movement. Kaido's senses were sharper now, thanks to the tattoo. He could hear their footsteps, feel the tension in the air, smell the distant smoke from the war machines stationed within the compound. Every detail seemed amplified, every thread a shadow in the back of his mind. Lyra moved beside him, her posture tight but confident. They were close now, close enough to make their move. With a subtle nod from Kaido, she crouched low, signaling that she was ready. The plan had been simple: infiltrate the fortress, take out the mercenary leader, and destroy their main control system. The execution, however, would be anything but simple. They were outnumbered. Their chances were slim. But the tattoo burned on Kaido's arm, its power pushing him forward like an unstoppable force. They moved swiftly, ghost-like figures slipping past the guards, using the cover of the shadows to avoid detection. The tattoo thrummed beneath Kaido's skin, urging him to go faster, to strike harder. His instincts were heightened to the point where his mind and body moved as one. Every twist, every turn felt fluid, every strike a preemptive blow that cut down their enemies before they even realized what had happened. They reached the heart of the fortress undetected. The inner sanctum loomed before them, an imposing command center surrounded by a thick steel door. A faint hum of electricity vibrated in the air, and Kaido could sense the soldiers behind the door, their weapons trained on the entrance. "You're sure about this?" Lyra whispered, her voice tight with anticipation. Kaido didn't answer. He didn't need to. He knew what was coming. His hand brushed against the tattoo again, the symbols glowing hotter as his body tensed, preparing for the fight ahead. "Let's finish this." Without another word, he kicked the door open. The soldiers inside reacted instantly, raising their weapons and firing. Kaido moved before the first shot was fired, his body a blur as he ducked and weaved, his blade cutting through the air. The tattoo pulsed with strength, guiding his every movement, making him faster than the soldiers could track. He struck with precision, taking out the mercenaries one by one, until the room was filled with the sound of heavy breathing and the unmistakable scent of blood. But there was no time to savor the victory. At the far end of the room stood their true target, the leader of the mercenaries, a hulking figure clad in black armor. He stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "You think you can defeat me, human?" the leader sneered. "You've killed my men, but you've only sealed your own fate." Kaido's fingers clenched around his blade. "I'm not here to talk." The leader lunged, his massive fists swinging with the force of a warhammer. Kaido dodged, his body moving with the grace of a predator. The tattoo on his arm flared with energy, guiding his movements as the battle intensified. His strikes were faster, stronger, his movements more fluid than ever before. But with each blow he landed, the tattoo demanded more. His breath grew heavier, his body trembling with the strain. He could feel it now, the power wasn't just an advantage, it was a curse, a burden that threatened to overtake him. But there was no stopping now. The mercenary leader raised his weapon, a monstrous energy rifle, and aimed at Kaido. The sound of the weapon charging was deafening, and for a split second, Kaido's world slowed to a crawl. It was then that he realized, the tattoo had been guiding him all along. It wasn't just a source of power, it was a connection to something greater. His ancestors, the Shinobi warriors who had come before him, were inside him now, their strength echoing through his blood. With one final, desperate strike, Kaido closed the distance, his blade crashing into the leader's weapon, shattering it into pieces. The mercenary's eyes widened in disbelief before Kaido drove his blade into his chest, ending the battle with a single, decisive strike. The leader's body crumpled to the ground, and silence filled the room. Kaido stood over him, panting, sweat dripping from his brow. The tattoo pulsed one last time, its glow fading into nothingness. His body was spent, drained from the battle, but the victory was his. Lyra approached, her steps measured, her face a mixture of awe and relief. "It's over," she said softly. Kaido nodded, his eyes distant as the reality of what he had just done settled in. The battle was won, but the war was far from over.